Every once in a generation, an anime will come along and fundamentally change the way we think about the world around us. Akira pushed the limits of what visual storytelling could be. Dragon Ball broke the anime industry's ceiling and reached a global audience that was never reached before. Full Metal Alchemist! Sorry, I couldn't resist. Full Metal Alchemist inspired so many young people to question the military-industrial complex and colonialism. One Piece is a mega hit around the world that is now becoming a symbol of resistance against oppression around the world. And I genuinely believe Orb on the Movements of the Earth is that next generational shift in storytelling that we see in anime that fundamentally alters the way we view the world and the way that we consume media. To me, Orb is not just a historical fiction on strangers across time trying to prove that the world moves around the sun. It's a story that dares us to antagonize anti-intellectualism, to challenge authority, to inspire us to be curious and to seek the truth no matter the cost, and to make the world around us a little bit better than how we found it, even if we don't get to reap the rewards. During a time when governments around the world have abandoned us during the fight against COVID, when insecure megalomaniacs take power and give rise to fascism, when misinformation plagues us through AI slop, corporatized journalism, and real-life thought police censoring us and infringing on our rights, Orb could not have come at a more perfect time in our lives. This will not be an in-depth moment-to-moment plot-by-plot review. If you want something like that, I do have a podcast called The Most Potato, where me and my partner Jess take shows like Orb and have fully detailed conversations and breakdowns of what we watched. In this video, I'd really like to focus mostly on the characters and the themes that they embody, because to me that is the meat and potatoes of this story. And the stories of each of these protagonists are things that we see in real-life revolutionaries every single day. And it's a reminder that positive change in the world isn't affected by people with so much power and money and influence. It starts with everyday people like you and me daring to challenge the powers that be, despite how insurmountable that might be. And this show ultimately explores the cost of truth. The question of what does the truth cost you? That is a question that gets brought up every once in a while in this series. And each of these characters that we explore have their own unique conclusion as to what the truth means to them, what it costs them, and what it means for them to get the truth out into the world when the society that surrounds them does not want that to happen. This video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't watched Orb on the Movements of the Earth, go watch that. You will thank me later. You don't have to care about astronomy or anime or any of that to be invested in a story like this. Okay, getting into the Rafal story, this one is very pivotal and crucial to get right, not just because of the fact that you have to hook the viewer in, but you have to really set the premise, the themes, and the philosophical ideas that characters will be wrestling with throughout the rest of this show. Rafal's story is one of the shortest ones, but also one of the most impactful ones. He starts off as a very ignorant, very cocky, very arrogant, very self-centered character who only cares about having a comfortable life, getting praise, and being seen as the smartest person in the room. But when he comes into contact with a supposed heretic named Hubert and learns about heliocentrism, something that's a fact that you and I know and take for granted every single day, but it's a revolutionary, world-changing piece of information for Rafal, we see him do that 180, and it's not just because he does a flip on a puddle of mud. I mean, that's part of it, but he actually does a 180 on his outlook on life. He takes in new information and changes his mind about what the truth is in regards to the planet that they're on. And that sounds like a very simple, very boring, very just low stakes thing. But when you really think about it, changing someone's mind in real life is a pain in the ass. When you know the truth about something and you have the facts, you have the figures, you have all your receipts that you're just ready to show this person, but they're just not willing to listen. That is one of the most infuriating fucking experiences that at least I personally have had. And we're living during a time of a huge rise in anti-intellectualism, where both powerful governments are trying to restrict what we know, but also a lot of people around us don't really want to know or care to know about what the truth is. They only want to perpetuate their own truths and their own agendas. Rafal represents the type of person that you want to be. You want to be the person that when they come across new information, you change your mind, you change your perspective, and you continue to learn from there. And I feel like to some degree, all of us have this instinct and inclination to avoid new ideas especially when it comes into conflict into our existing beliefs and especially our identities, because we spent so much time solidifying things that it feels like a burden and a pain in the ass to have to then shift those things. But ultimately, it's for the betterment of you as a person and the fellow people around you. And if you have at least half a brain, then you will make yourself open to new information and to change your opinion on things. And in a story like this, you need the perfect foil against people that are trying to discover the truth. And there's no one better than the character of Nowak, who I want to save for the end of this video because he goes through an immense journey with so many protagonists that it only makes sense to discuss him at the very end. But he presents the face of anti-intellectualism, the face of agendas and propaganda. When Nowak captures Rafal and he gives him the ultimatum of either choosing to recant his love of heliocentrism so that he can go to school or face torture and ultimately death, Rafal does not hesitate. And when he takes that piece of paper and just rips up his college application, I was just like, man, this dude is so based. I need to be like him. And this is something that only happens in an anime. A 12-year-old boy that has a philosophical epiphany and makes the ultimate sacrifice by giving up his life in order to give heliocentrism a chance to survive in the hands of other researchers. That is something that made me feel both inspired and then overwhelmingly sad. Because this world that he lives in does not give you room to explore the truth. The church is adamant about geocentrism, even if they know that that probably isn't the truth. The church isn't there to discover the truth. They're there to have power over people, even if it means having to use a lie, like geocentrism. You might think that a child giving up his life just for the chance of an idea to survive is ridiculous and probably stupid. Nowak definitely thinks that. But when they have a conversation with each other about it, Rafal comes to the decision that inspiration should take priority over lifespan. He comes to the conclusion that maximizing the amount of time you have is far more crucial than having a long life and not knowing what to do with it or not making the most of that life. And it got me thinking about what the specific theme of this arc was. And to me, the thing that stood out to me is this is basically an exploration of the death of someone's innocence, the death of your innocence when you learned a profound truth about the world. Think about the fact that the main character is a 12-year-old boy who's learning about a fundamentally world-changing fact. Rafal is not the same person once he learns about heliocentrism. All his arrogance is gone. He refuses to live a life where he pretends to be something that he's not. He doesn't want to spend his life studying theology and secretly studying heliocentrism, knowing that at any moment he'll most likely get caught anyways. So instead he hides the materials that he's been using and takes his own life in the hopes that somebody else will continue his work. Rafal is fundamentally changed by this idea. He is no longer the same person that cares about self-preservation. And that is something that we all have related to in one way or another. Not to the point of giving up our lives to keep an idea alive, but just the fact that a fact about the world has genuinely changed how you operate in the world that you live in. Think about all the times that you learned something new that changed the way that you saw the world. How did you feel the first time you learned that Santa wasn't real? Did it make you cry or did it make you indifferent? I personally knew the whole time. I just went along with my parents, but I kind of knew the whole time that it was my parents buying me the gifts. We didn't even have a chimney, so where was Santa going to come through in my Section 8 apartment? Or what about the time that you learned about where babies really came from? That is a fact that ultimately changes the way that you see the world. Or let's take it a step further. Let's talk about the first time that you had to do a school shooter drill. Or if you're someone my age or older who has to take a kid to school knowing that they have to go through school shooter drills, when once upon a time we just had to worry about fire drills. That is a piece of information that slowly sheds away our ignorance of the world, that pulls away the veil that our parents put on us to protect us as we prepare to be adults in a world that's full of chaos and beauty in every corner that we turn. Rafal is essentially going through the same experience, just to an extreme degree, in the world that he's living in. It's not something that you or I experience all the time, but sadly there are other places around the world where that is a reality. Just look at the ongoing genocide happening in Palestine. How many videos have gone viral of children younger than 10, vocalizing their pain of what they're going through, hearing their condemnations against Israel striking them every single day. just for the fact that they purely exist and they don't want their homes taken away, their cultures taken away, their family, their bloodlines taken away. That is sadly an extreme that real life children and adults experience every single day in different parts of the world. And it's all just to get the truth out there in hopes that people will actually listen and take action to help them. Children who live in extreme conditions like that lose their innocence much sooner than the average child in so-called developed nations. If we're lucky, we learn the darker and more complex truths about the world gradually over time at our own pace. But in the age of the internet and social media, that is gradually becoming less and less possible. And it is the responsibility of the adults in children's lives to teach the children about truths when they come across it, whether they're prepared to do it or not. Try to make the children understand what this piece of truth is and what you could do about it. The worst thing that you can do is hide the truth from someone that's already been exposed to it, who's looking for information and looking to understand, because otherwise they're going to make huge mistakes. The adults in Rafal's life have already failed him. Nowak, being an inquisitor who's willing to torture a child even though he doesn't want to, is a systemic failure caused by adults. Potoki giving up Rafal to begin with is a failure on him as a parent, and really brings into question if he even is a good parent, because ultimately he was trying to save himself from another strike from the church, which would have resulted in his death. Potoki had studied heliocentrism in the past, and that truth has followed him no matter how much he tried to hide from it after his warnings. It came back and got Rafal and infected him like a virus, and it was not going to go away. And even though he had really limited options in a very fascist world that they live in, the best thing he could have done for Rafal is teach him about what heliocentrism was and what to do about it and be smart about it. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about giving 10% to Potoki now that I'm thinking about this. But genuinely, I was really moved with Rafal's story in the short 3 episodes that we had with him. The depth of his innocence, of him throwing himself into the truth to the point where he couldn't bear to live a life of maybe finding one chance to finally get to explore the truth, is something so profound to me. And that's only just the starting point of this story. When we enter Ochy's story, we encounter this man who's lost and terrified and feels like he's been forsaken by God because he had a really shitty theology teacher that just told him the earth is at the center of the universe because it's being punished by God. That is the perfect way to just traumatize a poor kid and make him not have any hope in the world at all. Somebody cue that Christian rock song. For all my millennials, do you guys know that song called How Far Is Heaven by Los Lonely Boys? Just play that song. I wish I could put it in this video, but go and play that song, listen to the lyrics, and tell me that isn't Ochy's whole theme song right there, where he's just waiting to die just so he could finally go to heaven and actually start living. Anyways, Ochy becomes the next student in the school of heliocentrism, and he has to work with a really obnoxious, arrogant monk, which is the most ironic thing ever, in Badeni, and then a young but very bright astronomy student, Yolenta. And they make for like the best trio that I've seen in fiction in a long time. The way that these characters bounce off of each other and fill each other's gaps in terms of their philosophies and their outlooks on life. This trio's journey mostly focuses on the importance of collecting information, proving whether that information is true or false, and ultimately publishing it and making it readily available for the public to learn. Ochy and the crew specifically have to prove that the geocentric model is flawed and false by working with a very arrogant, again, another arrogant character in Piast, an astronomer who is the head of an astronomy lab, who spent his entire life working on the geocentric model and perfecting it, only for that to be crumbled when they test Ochy's vision to see Venus in its final phase. And when they see the full, complete Venus in the sky, it ultimately debunks the geocentrism model. And to Count Piast's dismay, he ultimately has to accept that everything that he worked for was all false information. It wasn't true. The geocentric model does not work, and heliocentrism is the one that's closer to the truth. And we see this man just break down, cry. He even dies after learning about the truth. That's how heartbroken he is. But he at least is someone that is willing to accept new information, even if it means it costs him all of his work. Arguably, him working his whole life to perfect the geocentrism model helps to prove that the heliocentrism model is something that is actually more factual. So in a sense, I feel like Piast ultimately did do valuable work, even if it meant that his model wasn't the true model. And now that the trio have a chance to publish this material and finalize the heliocentrism model, Oczy comes to an epiphany that this is information that should be made public and accessible to people of all education levels, which Badeni just goes, no, what? You're a stupid peasant. You don't know anything that you're talking about. If everyone was able to read and write, we'd be spreading false information all the time. But Oczy, being the badass that he always is, actually debunks his argument when he says it's important for people to challenge each other's ideas, because if only select few people get to publish information, you risk believing in a lie or a mistake instead of spreading the actual truth. This man Oczy is literally talking about peer reviewing to this man, and he has nothing to do with science. This comes after Oczy has a really wonderful conversation with Yolenta about the beauty of literature and the way that published materials is a way to connect people across all different spans of time, where a person 500 years from now could look at what you wrote now and be entertained by it or be moved to action by that writing. Oczy argues that faith and logic should be separated because the truth is better than believing in a mistake for the rest of your life, the way that Count Piast did. It was just really inspiring to see Oczy, who comes from no formal education, to come to such a profound conclusion like that. And to see him go from someone that's completely miserable with the world and feels like there's no point in putting effort into this world to now falling in love with heliocentrism, literally saying heliocentrism is my faith, and having hope in the world for the first time thanks to his exposure to heliocentrism. That is something that just genuinely just warmed my heart to witness. And it was great for him to have a moment to shine like that, because it just emphasizes how crucial it is to educate the uneducated, because it empowers people to learn more about the world around them and to empower the decisions that they make. To withhold knowledge is to leave people vulnerable to exploitation. Authoritarian governments can only survive based off of our ignorance. In Orb, the church has been exploiting people for years. We see one of the first few opening shots of the first episode. There's homeless people lying around in all different parts of the town, some of them nearby churches. And in Oczy's arc, the homeless people take even more front and center stage presence, and that's not by accident. When Oczy and Badeni are ultimately captured by Nowak and the church, and they are sentenced to death, Oczy proclaims that he now has faith in the world after learning that Badeni had spread Oczy's writing rather than Badeni's own dense, very complicated writing. To spread Oczy's story, a piece of fiction based on real life information that he learned, is just a meta commentary on what media does for us. Because of Oczy's simplistic, accessible writing, that information on heliocentrism now survives on the scalps of homeless people that Badeni had tattooed on them, only thanks to the fact that Oczy was kind enough to feed the homeless people bread just out of the kindness of his heart. No sort of ulterior motives, no complicated, complex planning. Oczy simply cared about other people. And because of that, Badeni was able to strike the final blow against the church by giving heliocentrism a chance, by having this writing transposed onto the homeless people's scalps. All of this that happens in this story is emphasis on the need to work with other people. There is no way that you can fundamentally change the world all on your own. It doesn't matter how much prestige you have, how much money or power. That is corruptible. That is something that blinds you. Community building, communal working, and collectivistic work, that is what ultimately changes the world for the better. Oczy's hope is birthed from that work. And because this writing was preserved, we now get to see that book in Draka's storyline, and how this book helps form a revolution. With Draka's story, we explore the cost of conviction, specifically how far a person's willing to go to stick with their beliefs. When we first meet Draka, she basically comes off as a capitalist businesswoman, which that's something that I did not expect in this story. But Uoto gives us a very compelling story with why Draka is so fixated on making more money for her community. She essentially pitches the idea that they should be building a more capitalistic society so that they can gain more money and weed out the people that are not contributing to that society, even though ultimately we know how that proves to be a very exploitative, very awful system. But we also can't help but sympathize with the way that she feels about money, because the money that she has is the last key keepsake of her father before he died. And she's trying to make sense of what this money means to her, why it was left to her, why it was the last thing that her father left for her. And so she comes to this conclusion. It comes to a basic need to survive. She's part of a nomadic group that has no home, that's been chased out of society, no thanks to the church's presence. And these are brown-skinned characters. I believe they're Romani, so there is a racial undertone as to why they're being oppressed as well. It's not just because of beliefs, because she mentions that she's converted to the religion that is dominant in that society, and they still don't have a home or a place to call their home in this society. And of course, when she ends up coming across the heliocentrism book, it's a world-altering fact to her as well, and something that she feels could maybe finally be that profitable thing that could turn her life around. But of course, that gets thrown out the window once she comes across Schmidt and the Heretic Liberation Front, which I gotta say that Captain Schmidt guy is the coolest character in this story by far. The man has one of the most insane bars that I've heard. The guy's a revolutionary badass, and he sports a very nice looking mustache that I wish I could pull off, but I'm not a mustache guy. And he could not be more opposite from Draka. He's someone that believes in God, but is not a believer in churches or anything that he deems artificial and man-made. Draka is a capitalist who is atheist and thinks that everything Captain Schmidt is doing and saying is completely nonsensical. The only thing that they can agree on is that the church is terrible and needs to go down. But to see two people from completely different worlds being able to meet across the aisle, come together and do the same work, again, is just something so inspiring and profound that I just wasn't ready for in this story. Early in this arc, we see that Captain Schmidt is met with a fan who wants to join the Heretic Liberation Front. And so Captain Schmidt asks him to essentially take what is basically a Bible, even though it's not explicitly called that, the scripture, gives it to the fan and tells him to relinquish everything that he loves, believes, and knows about the scripture so that he can join the team. And we see that this fan is not ready to do something like that. He says he believes in God and he still believes in the scripture, he just doesn't agree with the church. But Captain Schmidt says if you want to join and genuinely want to be participating in the changing of this world, you have to give up everything that you know and that you think that you know. When we see that the fan is not ready to do that, Captain Schmidt just moves along. He's someone that sticks to his convictions. He genuinely believes that anything made by men, including the church and the scripture itself, need to be abolished and burned down and ultimately make way for what he believes is the true presence of God, which is all of nature. He also mentions that humans can't hold the capacity to handle the truth and that ultimately misunderstandings are man-made disasters. And he ultimately leaves all of his decisions and actions to God. He flips coins and basically leaves it up to fate for him to make that next decision. Draka is the total opposite of that. She tries to be as calculating as possible, weighing out her options and going with her gut instincts and feelings. So to see these two completely differing viewpoints clash but then ultimately come together to be able to publish this heliocentrism book on a mass level with a new technology is something that was truly motivational and inspiring to see, knowing that in real life humans are very difficult to work with, and even for groups that are trying to fight for freedom, there's constant infighting that gets in the way of achieving a goal. And when it's revealed that Yolenta is the leader of the Liberation Front, my jaw was just on the fucking floor. That was something that I was not ready for. To see a woman in this world leading the charge on a revolution against the church, that is something that is just completely radical that I was on board for. And her willing to sacrifice her life in order to mass produce her friend's book is something that just does something to the soul right here, man. When Draka struggles to understand why Yolenta would go so far just to publish multiple books on heliocentrism, instead of trying to make money and a profit off of it, Yolenta teaches her a lesson on the importance of collectivism, connection to other people, and the preservation of history. Right now, young people like you are history's protagonists. People inherit the discoveries of their predecessors. That's why everyone who lives now carries the past with them. Why are people so concerned with memory? Why do we interpret individual phenomena according to linear time? Why do our minds compel us to look into history? The way I see it, God has given us a chance to learn. In other words, history is an extension of God's will. God causes all things to work together for good. That is God's will. Good is changing the world through human acts, little by little, over long periods of time. It's to participate in the dull, endless task of crawling toward good. By accepting and confronting evil rather than casting it aside, we sometimes give birth to a greater good. Without history, humans lose sight of that. They succumb to fear of the finite nature of life. That's why we lose our way when we ignore the past. Oh, I just get goosebumps just rereading that. That was so good. Yolenta perfectly captures the essence of what revolution is, and to fight to make good of the world, to make a better world for not just yourself, but the people around you. And when she ends up making the ultimate sacrifice by blowing herself up so that she can give Draka and Schmidt a chance to mass publish the book, Draka questions why someone like Yolenta would make such a decision. And again, Captain Schmidt, with those strong one-liners, just simply responds, "Convictions come at a price. If you can't risk your life, then you're all talk." Draka learns to make her own sacrifice as well. First, with having to give up her father's coins in order to make more material to replace the broken letters of the movable type machine so that they can get this book published. But then the next sacrifice that Draka makes is literally her own life. When Nowak finally catches up to Draka on her final ditch effort to try to convince Antony, this town's bishop, to try to sell heliocentrism as the new idea that is normalized, she ends up sacrificing her life to get a message across from Yolenta through a carrier pigeon, not even knowing what's said in the message. And even though Draka feels like she doesn't know what she fought for, what her life was for, which is a valid feeling to have when you're so young and you're bleeding out to death, she at least finally can take comfort in the sunlight as she's slowly dying. Whereas before, she hated being in the sun because it revealed all the truths about her, all her deepest, darkest feelings revolving around her dad's death. She finally takes Captain Schmidt's one little advice of bathing in the sun and being at peace, knowing that she contributed something to society, even if she doesn't fully know what the result is. So I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about Nowak towards the end, and at this point, Nowak has had his full arc. We've seen him deal with all of the protagonists that we've seen so far, and all the chances that Nowak had to really reflect on what he's learned about these characters, and really question what he's doing with his life with the church. But not once does he ever decide to reflect on anything, even if he has feelings that he can't ignore. When Nowak is laying in the church that's burning and he's slowly dying, he reveals that he felt pity for Rafal, because something like being burned or being tortured or being killed is not something that should happen to a 12-year-old boy. And if he had just listened to that feeling and then sat with it and really questioned what the church was doing, he could have had a better outcome. He could have probably still had a life with his daughter, instead of finding out that he basically had his daughter killed. And just before the fire, when Nowak is confronting Antony about working with Draka, Antony challenges his ideas on heliocentrism and bringing up the fact that heliocentrism isn't something that's being challenged anywhere else in the world. It's only in this particular area that Antony's father was in charge of. Someone who was a failed astronomer who decided to ban any new knowledge of astronomy. Antony really presses that question: what is so wrong about heliocentrism other than the fact that my father said it was wrong? And when Nowak can't produce an answer on his own, he's dumbfounded. He realizes he's been fighting for a cause that doesn't really amount to anything, that wasn't based on any sort of actual facts or truth. And when you really think about it, Nowak not once ever tries to come to any decisions on his own. Earlier in the series, when he comes across Oczy for the first time, when they release that heretic, he has to refer to the rule book on what to do when somebody from his staff betrays them. And then the ultimate rule is just, it's up to you to decide what you want to do. That's how far he is into being indoctrinated and being led by what the church says, instead of him thinking for himself for just a single second. Because he chose to stay in ignorance, because he chose not to question anything the church was doing or saying to him, it costed him everything: his daughter and his entire identity as a person, as an inquisitor, as someone that's been punishing, torturing, and killing people for decades, just to find out that he was hurting people for no good reason. That every single heretic that he's put down were not even heretics. They weren't sinners. They weren't demons. They were just people, curious people trying to get information out into the world that is valuable. I could not think of anything more soul-crushing than having your whole identity just be just a lie and a complete waste of time. Make no mistake, all the protagonists, they go through tragedies, but they at least gain something, whether it's knowledge or a sense of purpose or fulfillment. Nowak dies with nothing. He loses his daughter. He loses his sense of purpose and self. He admits that he's been the villain of this story the entire time. And that's probably the best thing that he can gain out of this situation, is knowing that he was in the wrong and that hopefully his daughter is in fact in heaven. Knowing that heliocentrism isn't some sort of sinful act or idea. As horrible as as Nowak was as a person, he was also a very compelling character who could have easily been just a mustache-twirling villain, but you could really sympathize with what he's going through at this point. And by the time we get to Albert's story, that's where we focus on the cost of truth. There's that question again, what is the cost of truth? And even though this was a weird ending that wasn't the most emotionally satisfying, I think it was one of the most poignant endings that you could have in a story like this, where you just get 1 or 2 episodes of a character based on real historical, like actual people, like an actual person coming across the idea of heliocentrism. And it's not even him exploring that idea, it's just him finally coming into contact with that idea that finally made it across to somebody important and powerful enough to get that out into the world. To see the idea of heliocentrism finally make it to that finish line by reaching Albert with that simple line from a mail delivery person reading the name of the book that Oczy and everyone, that Draka and Yolenta and Captain Schmidt tried to publish on the movements of the earth. That title alone got him questioning if in fact the world can actually move. The fact that just the text, just like the title of that book, was the genesis of that idea for this character. On paper sounds like a dumbass, stupid, annoying, unsatisfying ending, but in execution was for me really just perfect for this kind of story. Even if we don't get to see the characters survive and see the fruits of their labor, the idea itself survived. Heliocentrism, the protagonist itself, survives at the end of this story. With Albert's reflection on his childhood and the trauma of him seeing his father killed by evil adult Rafal, which that's also what I just wasn't expecting that, we get to see someone that tries to achieve the perfect balance of curiosity but also questioning what he sees and knows. Albert takes the lessons that he learned from Rafal and his own father, both the things that work and don't work, and we see him forging his own path when he reignites his own love and passion for astronomy. And it's when it's revealed that he eventually becomes a teacher of Nicholas Copernicus, who ultimately in real life is the astronomer who founds the idea of heliocentrism and makes it public to the world. That just got me thinking so much about how every day in our own history, there are so many unsung heroes who never make it to history book pages, who've done tireless work to getting the truth out into the world. But I also think about all the high-profile people that we hear about and see about who try to get the truth out into the world, knowing that it'll cost them everything, whether it's Edward Snowden and his efforts to leak the truth about the NSA spying on everyday Americans. He had to flee to Russia and leave everything that he knew behind, the life he knew, the people he loved, the place he called home, just so he could inform the public of how we were being over-surveilled. More recently, we've seen pro-Palestinian activist and Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil being abducted by ICE agents in March of 2025 as part of a broader attempt to silence any pro-Palestinian voices, regardless of anyone's legal status, and completely bypassing anybody's due process rights. That same month, Rumeysa Ozturk, a PhD student from Tufts University, was also abducted by DHS and taken to ICE without any charges, no warrants, nothing. She was simply going to break her Ramadan fast with her friends when she was taken off the streets. This was because she called on her university to divest from companies tied with Israel and their ongoing genocide in Palestine. She did this all through a simple opinion piece that she co-wrote, demanding the university to stop being complicit in its partnership with companies that funded Israel's military programs for a well-documented war crime. And now things have escalated to a point where ICE agents are now murdering American civilians for simply protecting their immigrant neighbors, with public executions of people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and executions that we don't get to witness like Keith Porter Jr. We're seeing real-life inquisitors in action in the US today because they're being threatened with the truth that the people now know. There are too many people that will not stay silent, that know too much about what is going on. Everything is connected. All of these executions just happened in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. This escalation in violence is a result of more Americans learning about the truth and being more outspoken about the truth, about the US's war crimes being committed in Palestine and kidnapping immigrants across the country, all because we have a fascist regime that wants to claim power over us and does not want to make the world better for people. The fact that Trump's regime continues to be more aggressive towards us means only one thing. The truth is at their doorstep, ready to blow their house down. And for right now, Nowak and his inquisitors don't really feel like a distant fictional horror. It's here right now. And it always has been here. It's just been lying in wait and has been operating quietly through different presidential regimes, But make no mistake, everything we're witnessing now in the US has been an old handbook that's been used for generations since the inception of the United States. More people are just now finally seeing that coming to light. And it's up to us, everyone in our communities, to come together, build coalitions, get to know each other, create safety nets for one another, and create plans of attacks when it's time for us to defend ourselves. This is what it means to fight for the truth. When you know too much about the world around you, you can't turn away from it. There's no way to ignore it anymore. We feel that whenever our neighbors or we ourselves are being harmed or targeted. And if we've learned anything from Orb on the movements of the earth, it's that the cost of truth is whatever it is we're willing to pay for it. Now, I'm not saying that an anime show is going to help revolutionize the world and make things better. What I'm saying is this show already takes pages from playbooks of what a revolution looks like based on history. And if a piece of media like Orb could help us move our hearts to action, to actually do the work of making the world around us better by learning more history, by building communities with each other, and by moving forward with love for the people around you, watching something like Orb can help stir you into action and hopefully stir an appetite in you for the truth. I know it got heavy towards the end with all the politics stuff, but art is political, whether you want it to be or not, and Orb is definitely a political show. Anyways, that's all I've got for this video. Let me know in the comments below your feelings on this show. Have you watched this show? What were your favorite moments of this show? Your favorite quotes? Does this show stir you into action? Does it make you motivated to do something better for people around you in your life? Would love to know all your thoughts, and until next time, stay safe, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time.